classic starts. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Retold from the Mark Twain original by Martin Woodside, illustrated by Lucy Curvino. Chapter 1, Tom and the Fence. Tom. No answer. Tom. No answer. Tom Sawyer, you come on out here. Aunt Polly scrunched her eyes and carefully looked over the bedroom. She'd turned the house upside down, but there was still no sign of the adventurous boy. You just wait until I get a hold of you. Tom's aunt muttered as she poked under the bed with the broom without success. Seeing an open window, she stuck her head out, scanning the garden for a glimpse of her headstrong nephew, but all she saw there was the stack of wood he hadn't cut and the grass he hadn't mowed. Suddenly hearing a small squeak behind her, she turned just in time to seize the small boy by his collar. Aha! She cried in triumph. I knew I should have checked that closet right off. Now, what's that on your mouth? Tom Sawyer stood before his aunt with his lips smeared a bright red. Nothing, ma'am, nothing indeed. Why, that's the fresh raspberry jam I made for Mrs. Harper. And what's that? Take your hands out of those pockets. As Tom slowly took his hands out, a white powder trail began raining down onto the floor. Aunt Polly shoved her hands into the pockets of Tom's overalls. My goodness, she cried in disbelief, you must have a pound of sugar in there. She put her hands on her hips and looked down at her nephew, Tom Sawyer. That is absolutely the last straw. The very next day was Saturday, and a fine summer Saturday it was. The morning sky was bright and fresh and the whole world brimmed with life. Tom, however, stood sadly out on the sidewalk with a bucket of whitewash and a long-handled brush. He looked at the fence in front of Aunt Polly's house. It was at least 9 feet high and ran nearly half the block long, and Tom had to paint it all as punishment for the mischief he had caused the day before. Sighing loudly, he dipped the brush in the bucket and began daubing one of the fence boards. After only a few strokes, Tom sat down. He began to think of all the fun he'd planned for the day. It was such a fine day for fishing, for fighting, for all kinds of adventuring, but Tom knew that painting the fence would take up all afternoon. Worse, other boys would come by soon and see him doing his chores while they had the whole day free for their adventures. Tom could barely stand the thought of it. Slowly, he got up and started back to work, dipping the brush into the bucket of whitewash and making long strokes over the boards of the fence. Tom hadn't been at work 5 minutes when he heard a sound he feared. It was whistling, and not just any whistling, it was the whistling of a boy set out on some great quest. Tom turned his head halfway and saw Ben Rogers bounding down the street with a hop, skip, and a jump, a shiny green apple in his hand. Tom turned back to his painting, but just then he had an idea. He stood up straight and stared at the fence in front of him with deep concentration. Curious at what Tom was doing, Ben Rogers now stopped right behind the silent boy. Tom could still hear him whistling. There was a pause, and then the sound of a big juicy crunch as Ben took a bite out of his apple. Pretending that he hadn't seen Ben at all, Tom started painting again. Ben Rogers started whistling again, this time even louder, but Tom kept on painting. Got to work, hey? Ben finally snickered. Tom didn't turn around to answer. Instead, he put his brush down and crossed his arms. He then rubbed his chin with one hand and stared at the fence as if he were working out some great mystery. I say. Ben coughed in yet another attempt to get Tom's attention. Aunt Polly put you to work? Tom turned suddenly as if shocked to see someone there. Gosh, Ben. I didn't know you was there. I'll bet you didn't. Ben smiled before taking another bite out of his delicious apple. I'm going to the swimming hole. Don't you wish you could come along? Of course, I'm sure you'd rather work all day. Tom looked Ben over slowly, from head to toe. With a puzzled face, he asked, What work are you talking about? Ain't that work, Ben said, pointing at the paintbrush and the fence. Tom looked Ben over again. Then he turned around, picked up his brush, and resumed painting. I suppose you're going to tell me you like painting that fence, Ben called out. Tom didn't turn around but simply said, it's not every day a boy gets to paint a whole fence by himself. Ben stopped in mid-bite and watched Tom run the brush daintily over the wood fence, stepping back every stroke or two to admire his work. Say, Tom, let me try. Tom stopped. He slowly turned to Ben while pretending to consider his idea for a moment. No, I'm sorry. Aunt Polly wouldn't like that. She said there ain't one boy in 1,000 that's fit to paint this fence. Come on, Tom, Ben moaned. Let me just try. Please. Just one stroke. I'd let you, if you was me. Tom started rubbing his chin again, looking Ben over just as seriously as he'd been looking that fence over. I'll give you my apple. Ben cried out. Tom considered a moment longer. Then, very slowly, he handed the brush over to Ben Rogers. Sitting under a shady tree, Tom now no longer gloomy savored the last tasty bite of the green apple and watched Ben paint the fence in the hot sun. Tom thought he had discovered something wonderful. To make a boy want something, all you had to do was make that something hard to get. Chapter 2, Showing Off in Sunday School. At breakfast the next day, Tom was still in a happy mood. With his belly full of ample portions of Aunt Polly's delicious hotcakes, he couldn't help but reflect on his success with Ben Rogers the day before. Suddenly, Tom remembered that it was Sunday, and Sunday meant much more than a great breakfast. As Aunt Polly got out her gold-leaf Bible and announced that it was time for family worship, Tom let out a mournful groan. An agonizing half an hour later, the boy was excused to memorize his verses for Sunday school. I done mine yesterday, his brother Sid said. Grinning from ear to ear, Sid then raced out the front door to go play. Quit fooling around, Tom. Aunt Polly called. Your cousin Mary will be here any minute now. Tom trudged off to his room and blew the dust off his tiny Bible. He had 5 Bible verses to memorize. Tom picked the Sermon on the Mount on account of those being the 5 shortest verses he could find. An hour later he woke up, face down in the holy book, with his cousin Mary's voice ringing in his ear. Hard at work, I see. Mary's eyes danced brightly as she took the book from her cousin. Let me hear you recite. Tom bent all his energies to remembering what he hadn't read. Blessed are the poor, Mary prompted. Yes, poor. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And on it went, with Tom stuttering through the verses and Mary reminding him gently. After a slow and painful hour, Mary announced it was now time for Tom to get dressed for Sunday school. After another groan from the boy, this one even louder than the one before, Mary helped Tom into his Sunday suit, buttoning his shirt to the top and fastening his necktie tightly. Tom made a face, feeling every bit as uncomfortable as he looked, as Mary brushed him off and crowned him with a speckled straw hat. He growled at Sid, who had come in from playing and was laughing at his brother from the doorway. Although he tried, Tom couldn't think of anything he hated more than Sunday school. Unlike Tom, his cousin Mary loved going to Sunday school, and she had even won some prizes there. If you could recite 2 verses from the Bible, you got a blue ticket from the Sunday school teacher, a tall, slim man with blonde hair and a deep booming voice named Walters. 10 blue tickets were equal to a red ticket, and 10 red tickets were equal to a yellow one. For 10 yellow tickets, you could become the proud owner of a plainly bound Bible. 2,000 verses seemed to Tom a heavy price to pay for such a prize. But Mary had won 2 of the Bibles, and a German-born boy had laid claim to 4 or 5. Although Tom had no use for such a prize, he still longed for the glory that came with earning it. After all, the delivery of the Bibles was a rare and noteworthy event. The sun shone brightly as Tom slowly walked behind Mary and slid down the dusty road to Sunday school. At the door of the church, Tom saw Billy, another friend of his who had also been dragged kicking and screaming into his Sunday best. Suddenly, Tom got an idea. "Say, Billy, you got a yeller ticket?" "Yes." "What'll you take for her?" "What'll you give?" "Piece of licorice and a fishhook." "Let's see 'em." The goods were examined, and the deal was done. Tom had a pile of such treasure in his pockets, and before too long, he had traded all of it for tickets, yellow, red, even blue tickets. When the bell finally rang for church, Tom's pockets were stuffed with tickets. Mr. Walter's Sunday school class was a restless, noisy, troublesome bunch of children, and Tom was the worst of them all. He couldn't resist pulling the hair of the first boy he saw, even though Mr. Walters immediately scolded him. But as soon as Mr. Walters turned his back, Tom poked the boy in front of him with a pin. "Ouch!" yelped the boy, and Mr. Walters was yelling at Tom again. Eventually, both Tom and the class settled down, and Mr. Walters listened patiently as the children stumbled through their verses. Finally, after everyone had finished reciting, Mr. Walters spoke. "Now children," he announced, "I want you all to sit up as straight and pretty as you can and give me all of your attention." As much as he tried to listen to what his Sunday school teacher was saying about a new family in town, Tom still felt his eyelids growing heavy. When they finally fluttered open, he saw that everyone was staring toward the back of the classroom at a chubby, middle-aged man with dark hair and spectacles and a very well-dressed and dignified lady. Although both the man and woman were quite grand-looking, it was the sight of their young daughter that caught Tom's eye. She was a lovely girl with blue eyes and blonde hair plaited into two long tails. As soon as he saw her face, Tom began making mischief again, pulling hair, making faces, in short, doing everything he could think of to try to gain her attention. After Mr. Walters had settled the class down again, he introduced the visitors and seated them in the front of the room. The chubby man turned out to be Judge Thatcher, the greatest judge in the county, and his daughter was named Becky. Now, thanks in part to Tom, everyone else began showing off. Mr. Walters loudly shouted out instructions while tending to pupils who were struggling with their reading and wagging fingers at those who were misbehaving. The students scrapped and scuffled, and some filled the air with wads of paper. All the while, the great Judge Thatcher beamed a majestic smile as he presided over the noisy class. For Mr. Walters, there was only one thing missing from the scene: the chance to deliver a Bible prize and exhibit one of his best young students to Judge Thatcher. He checked with all his star pupils, but no one had more than a few yellow tickets. Mr. Walters had just about given up hope when, of all people, Tom Sawyer came forward holding in his hand 9 yellow, 9 red, and 10 blue tickets. Tom's teacher turned pale. He hadn't expected to see anything like this for another 10 years at least. Shaking his head in disbelief, he counted the tickets once, twice, and then a third time while Tom grinned from ear to ear. And just like that, Tom Sawyer now became the envy of the whole class. The other students stared at him with bitter jealousy, especially those who now knew too late what they'd done by trading those tickets. Tom couldn't resist basking in the glory of the moment as Mr. Walters shook his hand vigorously. Becky Thatcher looked at Tom with some interest, but Tom didn't dare look in her direction. He couldn't bear to. When he was introduced to Judge Thatcher, he became so nervous that his tongue was tied and his heart started pounding. The judge put his hand on Tom's head, gently ruffling his hair, and asked him what his name was. To Tom. Thomas. Tell the gentleman your other name, Mr. Walters urged, starting to get more than a bit nervous himself. And don't forget your manners. Thomas Sawyer, sir. That's it! That's a good boy, exclaimed the judge. And 2,000 verses. That's a great, great many. Knowledge is what makes great men and good men. You will be a great man, Thomas, and one day you'll say, it's all owing to the precious Sunday school privileges of my boyhood. You'll be glad you spent the time to learn those 2,000 verses. You won't regret it at all. Now, and the great man eagerly put his hands together, you wouldn't mind sharing some of that knowledge with me, would you? No doubt, you know the names of all 12 disciples. Would you mind telling us the names of 2 of them? Mr. Walters tugged at his collar. He was starting to sweat, and he stared at Tom, who was now silent and blushing. Is it possible, Tom's teacher thought to himself, is it really possible the boy cannot answer the simplest question? Poor Tom was tugging at his buttonhole as his mind raced wildly, hoping desperately that he would somehow recall the right names. Answer the gentleman, Mr. Walters said hopefully. Don't be afraid. Now, come along, Thomas, the judge urged, this time a bit more sternly. The names of the first 2 disciples were David and Goliath. And then Tom ran out of the room as the rest of his Sunday school classmates howled with laughter. Chapter 3, Tom Meets Becky. Monday morning always made Tom miserable. With it began another week's slow suffering in school. Up early, Tom sat in bed thinking about the evils of school and how he could be free of them. He felt his head, hoping it was warm. Sadly, it wasn't. He inspected his body, hoping to find symptoms of some terrible illness. There were none. Just knowing that he was healthy made him feel even worse than before. Soon Tom was on the way to class feeling, as usual, in very low spirits when he came upon Huckleberry Finn. Huck Finn, the son of a local troublemaker, was hated and dreaded by all the mothers in town but loved and envied by their children. He came and went at his own free will and never had to go to church or school. Huck could go fishing or swimming whenever he chose and even stay up nights as late as he pleased. He was really great at swearing, and Tom Sawyer, like every other boy, was strictly forbidden to play with him. So, not surprisingly, Tom played with Huck Finn whenever he got the chance. Hello there, Huckleberry. Hello yourself, Tom. What's that you got inside that pouch? A medicine potion. My, it smells awful. What's in it? Catfish whiskers, 4-leaf clovers, owl eggs, and other stuff. What other stuff? That's none of your business. What it's good for, Huck? Good for? It cures warts if you use it right. How do you cure warts with it? Well, that's easy. You take the potion to the graveyard at midnight. That's when a devil will come, maybe 2 or 3, they come to get someone wicked who's died. And when they're taking that feller away, you throw the pouch with the potion in it after 'em. Then you say, devil follow corpse, potion follow devil, warts follow potion. No more warts. Did you ever try it, Huck? Nope. When do you think you're going to? Tonight. I reckon those devils ought to be there to get old Hoss Williams. But they buried him Saturday. Didn't they get him that night? Why, how you talk. How could they come till midnight, and then it's Sunday? Devils don't slosh around much on Sunday, I don't reckon. I never thought of that. Let me go with you, Tom pleaded. Of course, Huck replied. That is, Huck stared at him, assuming you ain't too afraid. Not likely. Tom shot back. Then, real quiet-like, he whispered to Huck, will you also tell me the other ingredients in the potion? I will if you show me that you ain't afraid. I'm not afraid of anything, Huck Finn. We'll see about that. I reckon we will. The 2 boys went on talking like this for some time before Tom remembered he had to go to school. Before leaving, he reminded Huckleberry Finn one more time not to forget to come fetch him that very night. When Tom finally entered the classroom, his schoolmaster, Mr. Dobbins, was quietly dozing in the front of the room, so Tom threw himself into his seat hoping no one would notice. No such luck. Thomas Sawyer. Whenever he heard his full name pronounced, Tom knew it meant trouble. "Come up here, Thomas." "Now, sir, suppose you tell us why you were late once again." Tom had been thinking up a good lie, a doozy of a lie as he walked slowly to the front of the room. Then he saw that long yellow hair hanging down and recognized the Thatcher girl sitting all the way on the girls' side of the schoolroom right next to an empty seat. Quick as a wink, he knew what he had to say next. "I stopped to talk to Huckleberry Finn," Tom said loudly. All eyes were on Tom Sawyer now, and his classmates wondered if he'd lost his mind. "What did you say?" Mr. Dobbins asked, not believing his own ears. "I stopped to talk to Huckleberry Finn." Tom spoke slowly, so there was no mistaking the words. "Thomas Sawyer, that is the most amazing confession I have ever heard." "Take off your jacket, sir." Dobbins got out his switch, and Tom stuck his arm out bravely to accept his punishment. Several loud whacks soon filled the air, and Tom winced with each one. Finally, the schoolmaster got tired and he put his switch down. "Now, sir," he said sternly, "go and sit with the girls. And let that be a warning to you." Tom took a seat at the end of the pine bench next to the girl with the long blonde tails. Nudges, winks, and whispers soon ran from one end of the room to another. Meanwhile, Tom sat perfectly still, his arms perched on the long, low desk, and seemed to study his book. Although he wore a blank look on his face, inside he couldn't have been happier. Eventually, the students turned back to their work, and the schoolmaster got back to dozing. Seizing his chance, Tom stole a glance at the beautiful girl beside him, but Becky only made a face at Tom before turning her head away. When, cautiously, she turned back, she saw a fresh peach on her desk. She quickly pushed it away. Tom gently put it back. She thrust the peach away again, and again Tom returned it, gently. This time she let it sit while Tom wrote on his paper, "Please take it, I got more." Becky read the message but said nothing. Now Tom began drawing something else on his paper, hiding his work with his left arm. Becky pretended not to notice what Tom was writing, but her curiosity soon got the better of her. She strained to see it, but Tom acted as if he didn't notice her at all. "Let me look at it," Becky finally whispered. Tom half uncovered the drawing, a crude house with a swirl of smoke floating up from the chimney. "It's peachy. Can you make a man?" So Tom drew a man standing in the front yard. He was big enough to step over the house without much trouble, but the girl didn't mention this. "He's dandy. Now can you draw a girl like me coming along?" Tom drew an hourglass with a full moon for a head and straw limbs for arms. "It's ever so nice," Becky said. "I wish I could draw." "It's easy," Tom whispered. "I'll learn you." "Oh, will you?" "When?" "At noon." "Do you go home for lunch?" "I'll stay if you want me to, Thomas Sawyer. That's only my name when I'm in trouble. Call me Tom, won't you?" "Yes." Tom smiled, then fell to working again, covering his paper with his hand. He wrote something there, but he kept it covered up. Again, Becky pleaded with Tom to see it. "Oh, it ain't nothing," Tom mumbled. "Yes, it is." "You wouldn't want to see it." "Yes, I do want to see it." "Please let me." "Are you sure?" "I am." "Oh, you don't want to see," Tom said coyly. With this reply, a small scuffle ensued. Becky put her hand over Tom's paper and tried to pull it from him. Tom pretended to resist, but he finally let her drag his hand away. Revealed on the paper were the following words, "I love you." "Oh, you bad thing," Becky said as she slapped him sharply on the hand. Still, Tom could tell from her face that she was pleased. But at just this very moment, Tom suddenly felt a tight grip locking around his ear. The next thing he knew, he was being lifted out of his seat by Mr. Dobbins, who dragged him clear across the room before rudely dumping him back again into his regular seat in the boys' section. Meanwhile, the whole schoolroom burst into fits of wild giggles at the sight. But although Tom's ear tingled, his heart was filled with joy. Chapter 4, Heartbreak Comes Quickly. Outside, the sun shone and the air smelled fresh, but inside the classroom not a breath of air was stirring. As Tom watched two bluebirds float lazily through the sky, he felt that recess would never come. He looked at Becky, who was busy with her studies, and thought that she was even prettier than Amy Lawrence, whom he had first courted in school. When noon finally came, the students quickly poured out of the schoolhouse to race home for lunch. As Becky got up from her seat, Tom whispered in her ear, "Go on out with the rest of 'em. When you get to the corner, give 'em the slip, turn through the lane, and come back. I'll meet up with you." Soon enough, the two classmates were back at the now empty school. They sat together with a blank page before them. Tom handed Becky his pencil. He held her hand, guiding it, and a short while later, another house appeared on the page. Becky smiled up at him. "Do you like rats?" Tom asked, after their interest in art had faded. "No, I hate them." "Well, I hate them, too, live ones. But I'm talking about dead ones." "No, I don't care for rats. What I like is chewing gum." "Oh, I should say so. I wish I had some now." "I've got some." So Tom and Becky sat quietly and chewed gum for a while, dangling their legs against the bench. "Was you ever at a circus?" Tom asked. "Yes, and my pa promised to take me again if I'm good. I've been to the circus 3 or 4 times. I'm going to be a clown in the circus when I grow up." "Oh, that'll be nice. They're so lovely, all spotted up and such. And they get buckets of money, I hear, even $1 a day." Tom then took a deep breath. "Say, Becky, was you ever engaged?" "No." "Would you like to?" "I don't know." "What's it like?" "Like? Why, it ain't like anything. You just tell a boy you won't have anyone but him ever, and then you kiss and that's all. Anyone can do it." "What do you kiss for?" "Well, that's what everyone does." "You remember what I wrote down on the paper for you?" "Yes." "What was it?" "I won't tell you." "I'll tell you," Tom said, and he reached over and put his arm around Becky's waist and whispered "I love you" into her ear. "Now you whisper it to me just the same way." Becky hesitated for a moment. Tom turned his face away and she bent over timidly, whispering faintly in his ear, "I love you." Then she sprang up and ran around the desks and benches and into a corner of the room where she hid her face behind her arms. "Now, Becky," Tom said, trying to comfort her, "it's all over." "All over but the kissin', you mustn't be afraid of that." Becky stayed that way, her back to him in the corner, face buried in her arms for a while. Tom kept talking, trying to convince her of the virtues of a kiss, until finally she turned and let her arms drop. Tom kissed her gently. "Now it's done. You ain't ever to love anyone but me, Becky, and you ain't ever to marry anyone else either." "I'll never love anyone else, Tom, and you ain't ever to either." "Of course not. That's a part of it. When we walk to school or play at parties, we'll always be together. It's so nice. I never heard of it before. It's wonderful. Why, me and Amy Lawrence." And Tom stopped, realizing his mistake instantly. "Oh, Tom. I am not the first you've been engaged to." Becky began to cry. "No, Becky, no, Tom pleaded. Don't cry. I don't care for Amy anymore. But Becky kept on crying. Tom tried to put his arm around her neck, but she pushed him away. Watching Becky cry made his heart ache. He stood there uneasily, not sure what to do or say. Becky, I don't care for anybody but you. Still no reply. Just sobs. Becky, won't you say something? More sobs. Tom searched his pockets and took out his most prized possession, a shiny brass star from the top of a fence. Please, Becky, won't you take it? She knocked the treasure to the floor. That was it for Tom. Now feeling angry as well as sad, Tom marched out of the schoolhouse and began running. He ran on and on past Cardiff Hill and behind the Douglas mansion. He kept on running until the schoolhouse was barely visible. Then he sat down for a long time with his elbows on his knees and his chin in his hands. What had he done? Tom thought. He had meant the best in the world and been treated like a dog. What if he turned his back now and disappeared completely? Becky would be sorry then. Then Tom had an idea. He would become a pirate, an adventure he had long dreamed about. How great it would be to go sail the dancing seas in a sleek black ship with a pirate flag tied to the mast. And after he became famous for his brave deeds, he would return to his old sleepy town of St. Petersburg, Missouri, and march into the church with his tall black boots and his red sash, his pistols and sword tucked into his belt. Everyone, even Becky, would then look at him and whisper, "It's Tom Sawyer, the famous pirate, the bravest man who ever sailed a ship." His future decided, Tom jumped to his feet and ran